In 1958, Jean Tierney's father admitted that he had stolen $4.2 million from her, which was money that she needed very badly to help her crippled daughter. But that was only the start of the shocking lies. These lost letters showed the terrible truth about everything from John F. Kennedy's mean rejection to working secretly in a dress shop while having a mental breakdown. Behind the most beautiful front in Hollywood. She was born in Brooklyn, New York on November 19, 1920. Her family was very rich. Dr. Howard Sherwood Tierney was a wealthy insurance broker, and Belle Lavinia Taylor was a PE teacher before she became a mother. Jean was raised in style. She went to the best schools and had a great time. She went to Switzerland to go to school at Brilliman International School when she was only 15. French was something she learned there that would help her as an actress. It took her 2 years to get back to the U.S., where she went to Miss Porter's School in Connecticut, which was known for teaching girls from wealthy families. In the same year, Jean hit the big time at a fancy event at the Fairfield Country Club. The dress she wore was based on one Betty Davis wore in the movie Jezebel. For many girls, this event was the first step toward marriage. But for Jean, it was the start of a whole new trip, her journey into acting. Not everything was fine at home, though. A big case against Jean's dad in the summer of 1938 hurt his insurance business. The family had to sell their lovely home in Connecticut. Her dad planned a car trip across the country to California to make everyone feel better. Everything changed on this trip. On August 14, 1938, Jean was at Warner Brothers Studios when the famous director Anatole Litvak saw her. He told her parents that their daughter should be in pictures because she was so beautiful. He even made plans for the next day for her to do a screen test. Everyone thought Jean was great when he read lines from his movie The Sisters. Warner Brothers made her an offer of $125 a week, but her dad turned it down. They said the money wasn't enough. Jean didn't give up, even though that could have ended her Hollywood hopes. She talked her dad into letting her try Broadway instead, saying it was a better choice for someone with her social status. Jean began working toward her goal after her first appearance in public in September 1938. She learned how to play at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and met producers on Broadway. Her first show on Broadway was What a Life, which opened on December 26, 1938. She had a small part to play. Not even the critics could miss her as she walked on stage with a bucket of water. Someone even said she was the most beautiful person who carried water they had ever seen. In early 1940, she got her big break when she got a part in the play The Male Animal. It was a big hit when it came out in March. Darryl F. Zanuck, who was in charge of 20th Century Fox, saw Jean on stage one night. He thought she should be in Hollywood because he was so impressed. Jean signed a 7-year deal with Fox on April 2, 1940, and began making $250 a week. She could also go back to Broadway once a year for a show, which got her father to agree. Jean's first big part in Hollywood was in The Shanghai Gesture, which came out in 1941. Jean played Poppy, a young woman who gets caught up in Shanghai's gaming world. It was a dark and risky movie. It was risky for the time to deal with heavy topics like addiction and crime, which made the movie stand out. Jean had a hard time with director Joseph von Sternberg, who made her do 27 takes of an upsetting scene. Even though there were problems, Jean's acting was praised, and the movie did well, making more than $1 million at the box office. This part made Jean stand out in Hollywood because it showed she could play complicated, deep personalities. Jean's career took off after she got the part in Heaven Can Wait in 1943. The role she played was Martha Van Cleve, a figure who goes from being a young woman to an old grandmother. She had to spend hours every day putting on makeup for this, especially for parts where she had to look a lot older. Jean was also 4 months pregnant while the movie was being made, so outfits and camera angles were carefully chosen to hide that. When it came out in August 1943, the movie was a huge hit, making $5.3 million at the box office. Jean was called one of the best comedic actors by critics who saw the show. She became a big star in Hollywood because of this. She now makes $3,000 a week instead of $2,000. Every month, she got thousands of love letters. By the end of 1943, Jean was a well-known star in Hollywood. It was a big deal for her when she played the lead role in Otto Preminger's 1944 dark film Laura. She played Laura Hunt in the movie. Everyone fell in love with her because she was so beautiful and mysterious. On October 11th, 1944, Laura came out, and people loved it, even though reviewers weren't sure at first. In the US, The movie made more than $2 million. Tierney's performance was disturbing, and the character will always be linked to her beautiful looks. One thing that stood out about the movie was a picture by Azadia Newman of Laura. This painting was so well known that it sold in 2005 for $477,000. The movie did even better after that. In 1945, it was even made into a radio show, and Jean played Laura again. A lot of people heard her, which made her an even bigger star. People have said that Laura is one of the best movies ever made over the years. The U.S. National Film Registry saved it in 1999, which shows how important it was to Hollywood history. Leave Her to Heaven, 1945, gave her another big part. Jean played Ellen Barrett this time. Ellen was a beautiful woman who was also very jealous. The movie made over $5.5 million at the box office, making it 20th Century Fox's most popular movie of the decade. Ellen watched her disabled brother die without helping him in one of the most shocking scenes. It took 3 long, hot days to film this moment at Base Lake in California. Jean had to put on shades to shield her eyes from the water's glare. She was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress for her scary performance, but she didn't win. Still, the movie became a classic, and in 2018 the Library of Congress decided to keep it alive. After the fact, famous director Martin Scorsese said it was one of his best movies and that Jean Tierney wasn't given enough credit as an actress. She was in Heaven Can Wait, 1943, with Ernst Lubitsch, and a number of movies with Otto Preminger, including Whirlpool, 1949, and Where the Sidewalk Ends, 1950. As a director, Lubitsch was tough, and Jean and him once got into a fight on set, but they ended up admiring each other. But Preminger made her a better actor. He taught her how to show how she really felt without acting too much, which made her shows stand out. In the end, she said that Preminger taught her that in acting, less is more. People also couldn't forget how pretty she was. Fox's CEO, Daryl F. Zanuck, said she was the most beautiful woman in movie history. Her beautiful green eyes and high cheekbones made her stand out. The popular movie song Laura was written about her because of the way she looked. Even great artists like Dali. A painting of her by Dali called In the Dream of Venus sold for $2.1 million many years later. Life for Jean Tierney was beautiful, full of love and sadness, but it was also hard in ways that would change her forever. Their love story was like something out of a movie when she met Oleg Cassini. He was 28 years old, and she was 20. They quickly fell in love, even though her parents didn't like him. People thought he only wanted her money, but Jean didn't mind. She was crazy about him. They shocked everyone in June 1941 when they ran off to Las Vegas to get married. They didn't even have wedding bands, so Jean wore her earrings instead. Because they didn't want anyone to know, they put fake names on their marriage certificate. Her dad was very mad at her and stopped giving her money. Then Oleg lost his job at Paramount, which made things even worse. But they still liked being together in the beginning. They were young, beautiful, and in love, but life began to test them in ways they didn't expect. Their lives would never be the same after their first daughter, Daria, was born in 1943. Jean caught German measles while she was pregnant while she was at the Hollywood canteen. She went there to help the soldiers. There were sad results from this one night, though. Daria was very sick and small when she was born. She only weighed 3 pounds and needed blood right away to stay alive. Soon, Jean and Oleg got terrible news from their doctors. Daria was brain damaged, partially blind, and deaf because she had measles. Jean was hurt. She thought she was to blame for what happened, and kept thinking that she was to blame for her daughter's pain. A lot of money was spent to try to help Daria, but it didn't work. Daria was put in a hospital when she was 4 years old because she was too hard to care for. It was the best choice for Daria, but Jean's heart was broken, and that pain will never go away. In 1946, 3 years later, Jean learned the exact cause of Daria's illness. At a tennis party, a fan came up to her and was thrilled to meet her favorite actor. The woman told Jean that she had met her at the Hollywood canteen during the war. She then admitted that she had broken her German measles quarantine just to meet Jean. Jean went cold. Her daughter has problems because of this woman's selfish choice. Jean didn't say anything. She was so shocked and angry that she just walked away. She would always remember this moment, making her feel even more guilty and sad than she was already. It was mean of them to use irony. Even though she loved her fame, it hurt her the most. In every part of her life, Jean's guilt over Daria showed up. She kept blaming herself for going to the Hollywood bar while she was pregnant. It kept going through her mind all the time. In the late 1940s, her mental health began to get worse. She started to feel worried and sad, and her mood would often change from being very happy to very sad. Her work also got worse. She lost it on the set of Magambo in 1953 and had to leave the movie. They had a hard time with their marriage because of Jean's problems. Taking care of Daria, paying for it, and Jean's getting worse health all put stress on their relationship. In 1946, they broke up. Oleg gave up his share of their land to help pay for Daria's care. During their breakup, they both dated other people, but they got back together in 1948 and had another daughter, Christina. Even though things seemed better for a while, they never really got along again. In 1952, they got a divorce and were no longer married. They stayed friends even after they broke up, and Oleg later told Jean she was the luckiest and unluckiest girl in the world. Her life became very interesting when she met John F. Kennedy in 1946. Jean was 26 years old and a film star already. Kennedy, who was 3 years older, was just getting into politics. They fell in love right away after meeting on the set of her movie Dragonwyck. Their relationship caused a stir in both Hollywood and Washington, D.C., where people were amazed by how well they looked together. Aside from being together on movie sets and at political events, they also went to fancy restaurants and clubs in New York and Boston. On August 12, 1946, they were photographed at the opening of The Razor's Edge. The picture became famous over time. Even when they weren't together, Kennedy and Jean were very close. He sent her a lot of books about politics and business to get her interested in his world. Kennedy told his friends that he wanted to be president one day while they were on vacation at Cape Cod in October 1946. As their friendship grew, he asked Jean to come to his family's house in Hyannisport in early 1947. She got to know his family. His mother, Rose Kennedy, liked her. Jean learned how hard it might be to fit in with a political family while she was with the Kennedys. Jean became more interested in Kennedy's life as they spent more time together. In March 1947, she even went to one of his campaign fundraisers and met important politicians. But their careers were taking them in different ways. Kennedy's plans to run for office and Jean's work commitments in Hollywood made it hard for them to balance their lives. They both knew by June 1947 that things were not going to work. They broke up with each other. Both of them were deeply affected by it, though. Jean was very upset about the split. Kennedy told her the truth at a lunch in New York on June 17, 1947. As a Catholic, he said he could never marry her since she was already married. He told her that getting married to her could hurt his hopes of getting elected. Jean was very sad. In her dreams, she saw herself married to him and even as First Lady. During his speech, Kennedy talked about his plans to become a congressman, then a senator, and finally president. He made it sound like love had nothing to do with his plans. Afterward, Jean wrote that it seemed like he was talking about someone else's life. Jean had a hard time mentally after the breakup. She lost weight, couldn't sleep, and threw herself into work to take her mind off of things. But the sadness didn't go away. In September 1947, she had a breakdown while making the movie Thunder in the East. She had to go to the hospital, which was the beginning of a long battle with her mental health. Even after many years, when John F. Kennedy became president in 1960, Jean was still getting help for her sadness. She congratulated him by telegram, and he was kind enough to reply. But it was a sad memory of what could have been. Years later, Jean said that Kennedy was the love of her life. But she also said that they taught her that dreams don't always come true. Jean was seeing other people after she broke up with Kennedy. Howard Hughes was a famous businessman who was known for being risky and having strange habits. She met him in 1940. He loved her so much that he did big things to win her over, like flying his plane low over her house and dropping roses into her pool. They were together on and off for many years. Even though it was rough, Hughes was bossy and would often leave without a word. Still, he cared about Jean, and years later, he paid for her mental care to show that he still cared about her. In 1952, Jean started dating Prince Ali Khan, a handsome playboy who was known for living a fancy life. They met in Cannes, and he gave her lots of expensive gifts, including a ring with 10 carats of diamonds. Their relationship was in the news, but Ali's father, Aga Khan III, didn't like it and told him he would stop giving him money if he married her. Jean stopped the relationship and went back to the U.S. because she felt too much pressure. She knew that their lives were too different to make it work. In Hollywood, Jean Tierney was one of the most beautiful and skilled actresses. But in the 1950s, her life took a sad turn. Small changes were made at first. She started to have mood swings and found it hard to concentrate at work. People saw that she was forgetting her lines and acting differently on set in 1952. Then, in 1953, everything went wrong. While she was making the movie Personal Affair on February 14th, she got lost on the studio lot and walked around aimlessly. She didn't know who was there or why she was there. She was then taken to the hospital, where she was told she had serious anxiety and depression. Her problems had a big effect on her work. It was 1953, and she was cast in a big movie by John Ford called Magambo. Stars like Clark Gable and Ava Gardner were going to be in the movie with her as Linda Nordley. It could have been a great chance, but Jean's mental health got in the way. She got really anxious and couldn't deal with the stress. She had a breakdown on set right before shooting began. She lost it, started yelling, and couldn't tell who was around her. The director had to find someone else to play her part, and Grace Kelly was chosen. Kelly did a wonderful job and got a Golden Globe for it. After seeing the movie, Jean felt sad. She knew that it could have been her time to shine, but she was sick and couldn't do that. By 1955, Jean was having an even harder time while making The Left Hand of God. She lost her lines and seemed to forget where she was some of the time. To help her, the workers had to put up cue cards all over the set. During a scene with Humphrey Bogart one day, she stopped moving at all. She was quiet and confused as she stood there until Bogart let her off the set. He helped her in any way he could because he knew she was hurt. In fact, Bogart went to the studio and told them they had to get Jean skilled help. He helped her with her lines and found ways to make things easier for her on set. Off set, he set up a low-key meeting for her with a therapist, acting like it was just a dinner. Jean really needed his help, and he gave it to her. From 1953 to 1959, Jean Tierney went through a lot of hard times while living in 3 different mental hospitals. She saw at least 12 doctors during this time. It all began when she checked herself into the Harkness Pavilion in New York City in 1953. She was soon moved to the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut, and stayed there for a long time. Another place she went was the Menninger Clinic in Kansas, where she had one of the worst treatments of her life. These were the cold packs. She was strapped to her sides and covered tightly in cold, wet sheets. Later, she said it felt like being buried in snow and that she cried as the minutes went by slowly. This treatment was meant to help people get better, but it made her feel like she was in constant pain. Her problems with mental health hurt her work a lot. She had to leave the 1953 movie Magambo, and Grace Kelly took her place. In 1955, 2 years after that, she worked with Humphrey Bogart on the movie The Left Hand of God. But while they were filming, her health got so much worse that Bogart told the studio she needed real help. Tierney would often start crying uncontrollably and was sure that someone was trying to hurt her. Even though she was in a very bad place, she kept on finishing the movie, which shows how determined she was. Shock therapy, which is also known as electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, was one of the worst things that happened to Tierney. She had 32 lessons over the course of 6 years, which is crazy. In her book, she wrote about having electrodes put on her temples and having seizures caused by electric currents. She said that this treatment was meant to be a big step forward, but back then doctors didn't fully understand the risks. She had terrible memory loss because of the treatments, which made it nearly impossible for her to act. It was so hard for her to remember things when she tried to start acting again in 1959 that she had to give up the idea. Not only did her memory loss hurt her job, it also hurt her personal life, making her feel lost and alone. Tierney was so desperate by December 1957 that he broke. She tried to get away from the Institute of Living while she was there. She jumped out a window and tried to climb down the building on a cold winter day. No longer the beautiful Hollywood star, people saw her as a desperate woman trying to get away. The staff found her right away on the grounds and brought her back inside. After that, doctors made sure she was safer and changed how she was treated. The attempt to leave became a public scandal, and the news stories showed how bad her problems had gotten. Tierney was open about her time in mental hospitals as she got older. It hurt her a lot to lose her freedom and be treated like she had no say in her life, which she wrote about in her book. She talked about how helpless she felt when she was held back. There were also times when she felt bored and alone, and days that seemed to go on forever. She used to be a Hollywood star, but now she lived in a world with strict rules and clean places. She even felt like a test subject while getting ECT and cold pack therapy. When Jean met W. In 1958, her life changed in a big way. Howard Lee is a rich oil man from Texas. Jean was having a hard time with her mental health and trying to restart her life at the time. Lee was 21 years older than her and had been married to Hedy Lamarr before. They met by chance in Aspen, Colorado, where Jean had gone to get better after bipolar disorder treatments in the hospital. Lee was very rich. He's worth more than $100 million now, and he fell in love with Jean very quickly. He didn't care about the news stories about how hard things were for her. He wanted to help her because he saw how strong she was. Their love grew very quickly. They flew on private jets, ate fancy meals, and talked about life and getting better. As she looked for stability, Lee gave it to her by supporting her choice to leave Hollywood and encouraging her to go to therapy. He not only became her partner, but also someone who genuinely cared about her health. The wedding took place in Aspen in July 1960 and was very small and private. It wasn't fancy. It was just family and close friends. They moved into a big house in Houston's River Oaks neighborhood after the wedding. At the time, the house was worth more than $2 million and was 5,000 square feet big. It became a safe place for Jean. It even had a room just for her where she could watch old movies. Jean became a Houston celebrity and got used to her new life. She did work for the Houston Grand Opera, took part in charity events, and joined the Mental Health Association. She wanted to help other people understand mental illness by sharing what she had learned. Jean also took up painting as a hobby and liked reading play lines for the local theater. Lee and she often went to their Florida summer home, where she liked to work in her yard and take long walks on the beach. Jean was away from the madness of Hollywood for more than 20 years and lived a peaceful and content life. Jean was happy, but she still loved playing. She came back to movies in the 1960s and had a few parts. She had a small but important part in the 1962 movie Advise and Consent. The reviewers liked what she did, saying that she was still as beautiful and strong as ever. This made her feel good about herself, so in 1963, she played a complicated character in Toys in the Attic. Her last movie was The Pleasure Seekers, which came out in 1964. It was another beautiful movie with her in it. After that, she tried acting on TV, in a movie from 1969, and a miniseries from 1880. But she had a hard time in Hollywood, and she always put her mental health first. She decided to take a break, and these roles were her last ones as an actress. Jean had a hard time getting along with her dad, Howard Tierney. She found out that he had stolen more than $250,000 from her in 1942, which is about $4.2 million today. This became clear to her when she tried to use her savings to take care of her daughter Daria. There was no more money. She has less than $5,000 left. The lie broke her heart, so she stopped being close to him. In 1958, her dad sent her a message telling her he was sorry for what he did and pleading for forgiveness. Jean didn't answer, but she kept the letter. In her book, she only briefly talked about it, saying that even the people we love can let us down in the deepest ways sometimes. She didn't talk about that sad part of her life very often. In 1958, while she was getting better, Jean did something unexpected. She worked in a small dress shop in Kansas without being seen. She worked 30 hours a week for $1.25 an hour and went by the name Mary Stevens. There were times when she felt free and scared that people might recognize her. She helped people choose clothes and hats for 4 months, and her life was normal. Later, a friend said Jean looked classy and nice, but no one knew who she really was. When a customer finally saw her, her time at the shop was over. Jean said that the months afterward were peaceful and helped her get better. She talked a lot about how doing easy, everyday tasks had helped her get better. Jean Tierney had a hard life, but she also found love, peace, and meaning in her life. She had to deal with lies, mental illness, and the stress of being famous, but she stayed strong.